Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whatever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. Oh, I heard that. The voice of that is James, it's Strecker, correct?
Yeah. You
of
got
Watchtower.
it. I am the voice of the applause sound effect.
Yes. The co-founder of Watchtower Database and co-host of Jump on the Batwagon.
Yes, sir.
There you go. This is probably another thing
you,
Brian can't listen to.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Right? Something will come up.
I'm sure we'll talk about stuff. Yeah.
Yes. So James is joining the podcast to discuss Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 2. I'm sure we'll probably talk about Part 1 and what could be in Part 3. Mm-hmm. So those are both available on every probably digital movie renting platform. I don't know. I don't think it has a max release, same time release. I don't know.
No, I went to check because I had to go through a whole thing just to watch it today because I buy all these things on iTunes because I'm in my 30s and I still use iTunes. And I don't know if normal people use iTunes. It's just the way that I know how to do it. But then I have to figure out a way to watch it on not my computer, and it was a ridiculous situation. I can't wait for digital to take over physical media. It's just so wonderful.
I also use iTunes, and the thing that I just realized this week was that you used to be able to set a watch or a wish list in iTunes on your phone, but now you have to do that on the Apple TV app.
Yeah, that's what I wound up watching it on. I didn't know that they talked to each other. It makes total sense that they do, but I'm also an Android boy now, so I there is no app for either of those on this phone, so it doesn't get in the way very often, but when I try to watch one of these, it does, and it's very annoying.
Yeah, I don't even know. Does Google Play Store even run? I don't think so. I don't know.
No.
I don't have anything Android outside of... Yeah, my PC is just a PC. All right. So we are going to have that was phone talk from two guys in their 30s. We are going to have
That's the name of the podcast.
There we go. Exactly. We're going to have probably a brief discussion of the film and non-spoilers. Time codes are always listed in the description. So if you haven't had a chance to watch this, we're recording about 3 days afterwards, and this comes out on a Monday. So you'll have had almost a week to watch it if you were going to watch it. And then spoilers where we can get into...
I had about 2 days to watch it, and I forced it into my schedule.
Yeah.
Just for you, Kyle, okay?
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm very grateful. I meant to watch it on Tuesday, and then what I wound up doing was I rewatched Part 1 yesterday, and then I also watched Part 2 this morning. So, and I also
feel like I should have watched Part 1 to remind myself what the hell was going on, but I figured it out maybe 20 minutes into the movie. I remembered most of the first one by that point, so yeah.
Yeah, I was going to give myself homework and reread Crisis on Infinite Earths, but I think I lent somebody my hardcover, and I just didn't bother to look for it digitally. So, Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 2 review starts now.
Kara, your friends are in mortal peril, but there is something we can do.
All right, James, I want you to... the sound clips. I'm so jealous. Why don't you start...
Yeah, you're like telling me like, well, this website can store clips and
I
things
know.
like
Well,
that. I'm
okay.
Like, I don't need that. I got this.
Is it going to play them? Nope, it's not playing anything.
Oh, yeah, I heard it.
There we
I
go.
heard it.
All right, so you tweeted this out already, so why don't you start off with non-spoiler thoughts? You said, I liked it. Why did you like it?
I did like it, yeah. Look, I said I liked it because going on Twitter is just a bad idea these days in general, but being there, the only commentary I've seen on it, and already, of course, even though it's only been out like 2 days when we're recording this, the amount of spoilers that just pass by me on the feed without wanting them to in any capacity is enormous. And they're always just people pointing out like, oh, I hated this thing. And so since I was trying to not look at exactly what they were talking about, I purposely avoided them. But then after watching the movie, I went back and looked at those tweets more closely to see, like, what exactly were you saying you didn't like about this? What was bad or whatever? And it was all stuff that was just the person saying it was bad was completely misreading the scene or not understanding the plot of the movie or not understanding non-linear storytelling or something like that, where I was just like, oh, okay, so you're just stupid, so it doesn't matter.
So you just explained film Twitter.
Yeah, pretty much. Or comic Twitter, any Twitter really. And yeah, so I said I liked it as kind of just like it's always nice for the Watchtower database to give their little tiny seal of approval, whatever it may mean, to kind of just to show people like, hey, you can enjoy this movie. It's okay. You know, you don't need to necessarily listen to everyone saying Batman and Harley Quinn is bad. Sure, it's not the most amazing movie I've ever seen, but you can still like it if you like it. Yeah.
But is it canon, James? Is it canon?
It is to me, okay? I'm not going to give an official answer. It doesn't matter is the answer, but
that's true.
Is to me.
You had, an hour and a half long video on the Watchtower database about that, so
yeah,
it's been discussed. I'm really torn on this trilogy so far. It took... So I should preface this. I did review part 1, and I should have listened to my review to remember what I said, because January feels like a really long time ago already.
I actually had to remind myself that part 1 came out in this calendar year because I was like, oh, I've just completely forgotten this movie or whatever. But it was weird because I liked part 1, I think more. But I liked it a lot when I saw it, and it wasn't that it like didn't stick with me or anything. I just got a lot going on, and I just didn't remember a lot of it. So, but I feel like that this part 2 is going to be better than it. Like, it isn't bad, but it's going to be better as part of the whole 3-part movie. Once we have part 3, I feel like it's going to be more of this is the full story. Because as its own movie, it's a little bit lacking, but it is still like refreshing to me to see a version of Crisis on Infinite Earths that isn't just the same predictable, exactly the same interpretation that we get on CW or whatever else has happened. And I can talk more about that when I can say specifics, but yeah.
Sure, no, that's fair. The part that I'm struggling with, which is interesting, both of these films are structured similarly, where that's about the nonlinear storytelling you've referenced before, and having a focus on specific characters while then being enwrapped with what's going on in Crisis. And I felt the execution of that in part 1 had much more finesse to it, and the way that they... Spoilers for part 1 are acceptable here because we're talking about part 2.
Sure.
But wrapping the story around the Flash and like time slipping and giving essentially a backstory to the Tomorrowverse Justice League, I thought was really interesting. And the way that they tied Amazo in through that whole narrative was really compelling. And you had the relationship between Iris and Barry and getting to see that develop. Barry being one of the only characters in the Tomorrowverse, this Butch Lukic shared universe that we have here, that's actually been developed kind of at all. And what I had a hard time with in Crisis Part 2, and I've watched it 1.5 times now. I was kind of just skimming through to make sure all the broad strokes I remembered, which is it feels like it attempts to do the same thing, but its focus on character, it's not nearly as... The finesse is not there. I would say one character's backstory I enjoyed, and then the other, and we'll get into spoilers, is like sits quite literally in his chair and goes, "So let me tell you about my life."
Yes, that's very true. Yeah, I definitely felt the same way because it was me being reminded of the better part 1 every time that they would do like here's part 1 had a lot of that thing that didn't make sense in one of the other Tomorrowverse movies. Let me explain what was actually going on there. And I really liked that. But I agree that in this one, them doing kind of the same thing with a couple characters was more shoehorned in, almost as if it was a
slag.
What were we supposed to, how do we explain how that happened? Like it didn't feel as much premeditated this time as much as it was like, let's shove in a couple other explanations for things that, like, I didn't need to know either of those things necessarily, and I would have been perfectly fine. Whereas part one's explanation of stuff was a lot more like, thank you, that makes sense now, and I really like what you've done to weave it all together. So it was a little bit, I don't want to say disappointing, because I didn't dislike the movie in general. Like I would gladly go watch it again right now, but I definitely, it wasn't as strong in several areas as part one was.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because it's difficult to do. The irony is there are so many films, and even television series, depending on how they're presented, where things are getting split up into parts. Famously, it was done with YA novels. Crisis on Infinite Earths was on the CW in a 5-part event.
Well, and the original, Crisis on Infinite Earths comics isn't just like one comic, so
no, yeah. If you just read the 12, you have no idea what's going on, and it's. I mean, I reviewed a part 2 last week with Rebel Moon Part 2, and outside of there being a cliffhanger with the destruction of the future, the Legion being wiped from the timeline, it really does work for the most part as a solid film. And a lot of part 2 that I'm hoping I think you're probably right that once we have part 3 in, I don't know, July or August, it'll be like, oh, this was doing all the legwork for the conclusion. Yeah. Except for this. So this is, I wouldn't consider this a spoiler. It's in all the trailers. My biggest sticking point, and we can get into spoilers, I think, just shortly after this, which is why this doesn't work for me as this crisis event is twofold. One, we're with characters we've barely spent any time with. And two, the quote-unquote crisis multiverse part of the event, outside of Wonder Woman and Aquaman, and I guess Psycho Pirate, every time they're introducing someone from another Earth, they're new to us.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's I'm of two minds on it, because on one hand, I appreciate that when they do have an appearance, I mean, this is also in the trailers, Batman Beyond makes an appearance. He doesn't overstay his welcome. I do wish he had a little more to do than he did, but I was glad that it wasn't just like a Teen Titans Go versus Teen Titans, where they're just like, and now here comes a portal, and it's this Justice League that you know, or it's this Batman that you know, or whatever. I feel like part 3 will probably have some of that, which is fine. Like, you got to have some of it in there somewhere, but this particular movie was a lot of just kind of like, who are the most boring characters, and who are the most like ones that again, like you said, ones that you've never really spent much time with or cared about. Like, one of the tweets that I was upset with was them saying that they didn't like this portrayal of Batman, and they were using a particular scene where that Batman is not of his right mind as an example of why they don't like him. And I was just like, okay, so did you watch the movie? Like, what are you talking about? Whatever. But at the same time, even if it was him for real, like normal him, it would still, he's not, we haven't spent more than 2-3 movies with him. And it doesn't have that weight to it that even the CW one had, where you've had like 6-7 seasons of Arrow or whatever, probably more.
It would have been, I actually, it's just behind me. I have the whole Arrowverse on physical media. But no, it was perfect. Like, that was the culminating event. And this is like, I know I'm sounding like a hypocrite to some degree because as somebody who like enjoyed the investment of the MCU leading up to Infinity War and
Right.
Endgame, but then also being a fan of the Ultimate Edition of Batman versus Superman, which, in my opinion, effectively introduced Wonder Woman and Batman into that Man of Steel universe before it was just the one movie, that these characters... I mean, I feel like we should just jump into spoilers because we're really jumping through a lot of hoops to not ruin anything for anybody. Like, I liked, similar to part 1, I did enjoy watching part 2 when I was going through it again because I've now know what it is, where I think I was probably expecting it to be more like part 1 and then it being the focus and kind of probably what's going to be the backbone of the conclusion. Like, that is a lot of legwork you have to do with these characters and moving everybody over. But in terms of feeling like an event, I feel like it really underdoes what part 1 did.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, I think seeing it all as one big thing will be a lot better. But there were just times in this where I felt like the pacing was... Are we doing official spoilers at this point? Is that what we're on?
Yeah, we'll jump into spoilers right now. So if you haven't seen part 1 or part 2, jump out now and I'll see you next week.
You think he just happened to be in the neighborhood when your planet blew up?
What are you saying?
Okay,
So, yeah.
Good. Have a good one, everybody.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, so go ahead.
Oh, part 2's pacing was a lot worse to me than part 1. It's so weird because I still, my big thing has always just been that I don't want to see a direct adaptation of a comic book as a cartoon. Like, there are some times where that's really cool, but I was trying to picture these movies as not so much it's Crisis on Infinite Earths, the comic book, but it's moving now, as much as it is here's like, because if it was the Justice League 2000s cartoon and they had an episode called Crisis on Infinite Earths, it's not just going to suddenly swap into the continuity of 1980s comic books and be Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's going to be DCAU Justice League experiencing a similar situation, similar events are happening. It's an adaptation or whatever. And that's definitely the same here, where clearly this isn't, the same Monitor or the same Harbinger or whatever. Pariah obviously is very different with it being Constantine, which I really like. And there's a lot of elements like that I'm very into, that I'm like, yes, that's a really cool way to adapt that. And that's a really cool version of this thing. But there's always going to be people that will want it to be exactly like the comic book, and then they'll just find it to be bad if it's not. I didn't find this movie to be quote unquote bad because of it not being exactly like the comic. There were a lot of times when Psycho Pirate is inside and the Anti-Monitor, he's like talking to him. They're having a little evil conversation where I was just going like, oh, that's really cool. And he gives him his name and all this kind of stuff. But then, that didn't happen that way in the comic. And I don't even think Psycho Pirate, I'm going to show my comic hand here, but I can't remember if Psycho Pirate was part of that or if he was part of a different Crisis, and they've kind of smudged him into this one.
So what I recall, I was looking this up because I know there's been a lot of differences back and forth, but his involvement is he still gets recruited by the Anti-Monitor and whatnot. Like, he's responsible for the deaths, or he's involved with Firestorm. It's a whole thing. Like,
okay.
I think that's a really great point, and something that should be considered a lot of the times when it comes to adaptation. You don't actually want to see the same thing because, as we've talked about, a comic book's pacing, if you were to, for example, do it page by page and just add 20 minutes of unnecessary prologue, you get the Batman the Killing Joke, which I don't think anybody was happy about. But if you adapt it into well-executed home video, you get something like Batman Under the Red Hood, which did change things. If you read the comic version of that, Jason Todd came back to life because Batman or not Batman, Superman punched time, and it reverberated through, right?
Punched
and in a
reality,
movie,
yeah.
that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You brought up something.
I mean, it's just like the Killing Joke and Gotham by Gaslight and what was the other one that changed the bad guy on you?
Hush did it.
Were all, but they were all ones that were like, okay, you didn't need to do that, but I'm sort of glad. Like, I don't necessarily agree with all the choices they made of the differences from the comic, but I also enjoy not knowing what's going to happen. Where it's like, if I've read the comic and I go to see the movie and I know exactly what's going to happen, what's the point? Like, and you brought up the MCU as an example earlier, which is, if Infinity Gauntlet happened the exact same way and Thanos is courting death and all this kind of stuff, like, you know exactly what's going to happen, no one would care. It'd be like, oh, cool, neat, they did that. But instead, it's one of the most monumental events in cinema history, or whatever you want to it is to me. I just rewatched Infinity War yesterday because I'm making my way through Endgame stuff, and I think that the timing of that was really interesting with watching this too, where it felt very similarly meant to be like, look at these guys that that are not the comic book versions. But like we're talking about, we don't really know these guys, so it doesn't have as much impact to it as it could. If it was even the New 52, the DC animated movie universe versions of the Justice League, it would at least, like the previous continuity of movies, it would at least have a little bit more weight to it. And of course, obviously, if it was the DCAU Justice League, it would be even better, but you can't do that anymore, so it doesn't matter.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the DeCamu, because they are laying the groundwork for something that I think will be absolutely monumental. I believe you covered Dark Apocalypse War on Watchtower Database, which is there are way too many inferences that this is the John Constantine. So spoilers for Justice League Apocalypse War. There have been, in my mind, there are references, and they are heavily implying that this is the John that sent the Flash to reset the universe that I'm pretty convinced created the Tomorrowverse. And that, to me, is something that is incredible, because for what the DeCamu was, we had 26 movies. By the time you got to their end game, like the consequences of all of that really felt substantial, particularly the way that they retroactively worked in Flashpoint. I think that's really cool. And that's one of the elements for me that feels missing from part 2 is, so we talked about the part 1 being about the Flash, and I mean, Constantine, I think he winds up being in both films about the same amount, but the through line with Supergirl's Nolan-esque origin story being woven in here is fine to some degree. Legends of Tomorrow. What are they called? They're the Legion of Superheroes.
Legion of Superheroes,
that's what they're called. Too many L words. Yeah, that film to me was maybe one of the ones I enjoyed the least so far in the Tomorrowverse. So just getting reminders of that, not necessarily my cup of tea. But as I joked, like, Psycho Pirate literally just sitting down, and his time frame for what's going on only makes sense when you get to his conclusion of being recruited by Harbinger. He's like, I'm just going to do evil things because I'm evil.
Right. And that completely felt unnecessary to know. Yeah. I don't feel like I needed to know how he got to Atlantis or whatever in the JSA movie. And I think part of the thing that you're talking about with Constantine being looped in, or these explanations of through lines that were like, okay, I guess that's cool to know or whatever, it makes me think of how, if you want to keep comparing it to the MCU, it's like everyone in the world was going to see those movies. Like there's so many Easter eggs and discussions online and everything between every movie that me watching them linearly years later without any of that in between is almost, it's almost slightly disappointing, because it's kind of like you can never be part of the event of it all again. Like you can never be there in real time again. It was a fleeting moment to be in the theater when this thing or that thing happens in Endgame that will be forever ingrained in my mind and that kind of stuff. But they're still very, enjoyable movies, and I'm glad that I'm doing this. But going in and watching these, it's like I actually didn't. I completely skipped, not on purpose, but I just forgot to watch the Legion of Superheroes animated movie until right when part 1 of this was coming out. And I went, oh, wait, I haven't seen this one yet, I guess. I should probably watch that before, which is completely unthinkable with like, oh, I missed Iron Man 3 or something like that. Like, no, you didn't. Everyone saw this. Everyone saw Guardians of the Galaxy. Everyone's, all this stuff where no one's going into Infinity War going, wait, what? Like, who are these guys flying around in a spaceship? Who is this guy with a hammer? All this stuff. Whereas you might pick up Crisis on Infinite Earths off the shelf at Walmart and watch it and be experiencing 20 minutes of Psycho Pirate talking about Nazis and be like, what the hell is this? Why do I care or whatever? Whereas obviously I know, okay, this is from the JSA movie, but these aren't so globally consumed. It's not this big deal. That I almost feel sad about that, because I think if it was more either advertised or just part of pop culture more, that these crisis movies might be getting a better rap, because I feel like they're doing a really good job of tying everything together and being this big climactic thing. But if you don't know what the hell's happening, none of it matters to you the same way. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a really good jumping off point. Like, I don't want to talk about Psycho Pirate as a Nazi anymore, because it just kind of bumps me out. He's super creepy. But in terms of investment,
I love his line that says, "I like Nazis," and I went, "Oh boy."
That's okay, apparently now. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. What I find really funny, and I know this is purely a marketing ploy, so I have the IMDb up right now. And center frame on that poster is Batman, right? Batman sells. We all know this. Yeah. Right? You make, on average, how many YouTube videos do you think you make that are Batman, right? Like,
definitely a running gag that we do too many Batman videos, but it works. Like, Batman in the thumbnail,
Yeah, exactly, right? And that, to me, is what feels like the biggest miss, which is, you brought up a great point, and it's something I kind of wish was the case, which was, if we're experiencing this crisis with the Tomorrow League, we had essentially an origin movie for Flash. If this movie focused on Batman and his relationships, like, we got a little bit of that in part 1, and I feel so bad that hit my mic. Sorry, I feel so bad that I feel this way. But Jensen Ackles' Batman's the worst.
Oh, I like him.
Like, he just...
I like the voice.
Like, he's a good actor. Yeah. No, the voice works. But in terms of this Batman... And I read an interview with Jim Krieg on, like, what they're trying to do with him. And I get it to some degree.
Which is what's Jim say about that?
So what Jimmy Boy says is because they've said that the plan was to lead to this. And as you mentioned, you can see elements, particularly with Flash stuff, that was kind of embedded into other films. We had the JSA, we had him show up in War World, which was something I did react to quite enthusiastically when I saw Crisis Part 1 for the first time, which is they deliberately, because they knew they were going to do Crisis, because this avenue of DC animation was coming to an end because of James Gunn. I'm not blaming James, just synergy is synergy. And so they wanted this Batman to be a really solitary character, because through the Crisis event, he's going to have all these interactions with Earth 2 Robin, Earth 3 Huntress, and stuff, which is elements from the comics. And while I commend Jim for that goal, unfortunately, we don't spend nearly enough time with them. Like, you mentioned somebody tweeting him being mad and fighting them because they're all being taken over by Psycho Pirate, because that's what he wants to do. He hates everyone, and he wants everyone to hate everybody. And unfortunately, my investment in that conflict is minimal because we're jumping around so much, and we had to spend 30 minutes with, hey, how to be a Nazi on Earth 2. And honestly, I laughed when I was rewatching this just before we started chatting, because you and I both knew that Will Friedle was going to be in this. And when they showed up, I'm like, okay, we don't. And so another thing I learned, I was watching the bonus features for this. Apparently, I don't know if you know this, the Batgirl is supposed to be from like the Adam West show.
Oh, okay.
But she has one line of dialogue, and Terry, who doesn't even walk into frame, he slides in like a Speed Racer character at one point, just doesn't speak.
Yeah, he has like 2 lines, and one of them barely sounded like Will Friedle. The first thing he says, I was like, was that actually him? Oh, okay. But yeah.
Yeah. And I feel so frustrated by this, and it's not anybody's fault in particular. I mean, you can see the X-Men 97 poster behind me. And I'm really enjoying the story of that show, but unfortunately, it's become abundantly clear that American animation just doesn't have the budgets it's used to. And whether that led to Will Friedle saying a line and a half, we didn't even get any "ruh" like from him fighting.
Yeah, just
I don't
a
think.
couple little grunts every once in a while, but barely. Yeah, I mean,
but from a writing standpoint, how interesting would it be to actually get to see these characters who spent time with their Bruces and be like, you were like, they talk about the relationship, but it's a line. Helena's mad, you're not my real dad. Well, no, he's not your real dad. Your real dad's dead. Sorry. He went out for cigarettes and never came back. Or Earth 2 Robin, who actually was trained by Bruce. But again, we get to spend 30 minutes with how to be a Nazi.
Yeah, well, it's also like each of those Bat family members are, presumably from a different Earth. They don't really explain that in the context of the movie.
Yeah.
There's just a bunch of Batman-ish people, and you have to guess that they're all plucked from different places just because they happen to be there. But you're rooting for or against like the idea of Robin, the idea of Terry, the idea of Batgirl, and whoever else was there, Batwing, I think, and Damian and all this stuff.
He shows up for one background shot.
Batwing flung into frame and then never was there in the scene the rest of the time. But anyway, all these guys that you know from other stuff that you have connections to from other movies and TV shows and stuff like that, that within just this movie you don't really get to care about. It would be like if the Guardians of the Galaxy showed up in Infinity War, but there had been no Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and that one guy in the audience that knows Guardians of the Galaxy from like 70s, 80s comics or whatever just goes, "Oh, crap, cool, it's that guy." I felt like that guy going, "Oh, crap, cool, it's Terry McGinnis," but no one in the movie cares, and it's never explained.
No.
So.
Yeah, it's not like we don't keep epilogue a secret here. I know you're going to.
That's okay. You at least said it.
Yeah, what that relationship is like, all of those building blocks to actually explore why, in my opinion, this Earth 1 Bruce sucks would be really interesting, right? Like, you are quite literally given the opportunity to see what positive impact you could have if you stopped being a dickhead. Like,
he's only taking the negativity of like, oh well, I can't believe that some guy would make you his child soldier and all this stuff. I can't believe that he would do that. I would never do that. I'm much better than any other Batman, clearly, when he doesn't see, but you actually kept him from becoming a terrible person or from dying himself or from, this thing and that thing. And yeah, I mean, it's Robin and the other Robin and Batgirl and all these characters that are there are just, like I said, they're the idea of them, but they're not, oh man, yeah, what Batman could learn from Dick Grayson of Earth whatever that we met last movie, I don't know what that is. I don't know what he could learn from him. I don't know who this is. So it's an interesting choice to do Crisis so quickly, I guess, in this, if this is like the 6th or 7th movie or something. So yeah.
But it makes it even simpler to some degree. Like, Damien shows up. Make him the Decamu Damien.
Right, yeah.
Right? Like,
well, I guess you could. I think that is a universe is like officially gone or whatever.
I guess it would be wiped out. Sure.
Something similar, yeah. Where you could, yeah. I mean, even Terry being there, they don't tell you if that's the one, the DCAU Terry, or if that's just a Terry from something. Because
he's probably, or what is it, Urs-16?
12, but yeah,
12.
Yeah, it could be anything.
What is 16?
But they don't. 16 is Young Justice. Yeah,
that's right.
Jeez.
The far superior animated show. Yeah, why don't I know this? Yeah, I think that's, to me, what it's a fine line, and it's nothing. I don't envy the production crews for this at all, which is, you don't want this to just be a cameo fest, because I know you and I would probably feel this way, and tell me if I'm wrong. Let's not even say it's a DCAU person. Mm-hmm. Let's say Jesse McCartney shows up as Nightwing from Young Justice. In my opinion, one of the best DC cartoons of all time. Right? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, part of my issue is we're seeing everyone in the same art style.
Right.
And in part 1, and this is probably based on time, like the length of the movies only being an hour and a half as well. Like, ultimately, the story is going to be 4.5 hours, I guess. But when we see him with Dick Grayson in part 1, he sees Barry, and then I guess they potentially hangs out with Wally, and he's like, well, I think I'm going to leave him here at the Central City Orphanage or whatever. But we don't actually see the ending of that. Like, we've seen Long Halloween and War World, but we don't actually know if there's a Robin. So when he showed up at first, you're like, I'm from another Earth. I'm like, oh, okay. And that's it? Oh, okay. Yeah. You're just from Earth 2, and you're my dad. But Helena, you're like at minimum 18. This can't be your dad, because he's like maybe 30.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that's, for me, the biggest hurdle is what the chosen focus was for this, when the simplest idea, and they market it to you, like the extended preview for this is just the scenes of the Bat family.
Yeah. Yeah, it's supposed to be, it's very Batman heavy or whatever, but I agree that this Batman being involved in this feels like if, like Robin's Reckoning flashback Batman was suddenly thrust into a Crisis on Infinite Earths. Like, it's like this very like early Batman, and he's just so like, well, clearly I'm much better than these other Batmans that I don't know or whatever. Like, I almost wanted Kevin Conroy Batman to pop in right at that minute and be like, shut the fuck up. Like, what are you talking about?
I don't know if Brian mentioned this to you. So when we did discuss Mask of the Phantasm for the 4K release, I very quickly had to lay out my favorite BTAS episodes, and Robin's Reckoning Part 1 is my favorite episode of all time.
It's very good.
It's so good.
Yes.
It's so good. Yeah, I'm mad that I'm not excited, because the ending of part 1 was really interesting with, okay, things have changed, like the timelines because of what's going on, the Monitor choosing to be involved. Yeah. And then the ending for this is like big kaiju, cool design anti-Monitor. And the setup for this is like, but I'm like, what are we doing now? Because even the pseudoscience of the tuning fork towers, like sometimes it feels like, I don't know if Earth gets destroyed or not. It's
hard to tell.
And also them choosing to put Wonder Woman on Earth 2, who we saw once, and then why she would have a relationship with Earth 1 Supes and Bats is nonsense, because they're not hers, right? We learned she has a Superman who, again, this is just an annoyance when it comes to production. Why is he in essentially the same suit? Like, I know it's not Kingdom Come, but give him that logo.
Yeah,
something.
The whole time when he's standing there looking through his like super binoculars or whatever, I was like, oh, okay, it's Superman. But it wasn't until like a dozen shots later when he has cheekbones. Is this the old one? I guess that's the old one. They didn't really tell me that.
No, it's actually Superman from season 1 of Justice League because he's got cheekbones.
He's just in this art style. Well, that's the thing with the different lens or whatever about what you're looking at in this is like the rules of multiverse presentation across different media is always different. Where do you become that art style when you pop into that world, or do you stay your own art style or whatever? Does that, because you're talking about wishing that we had more time with these guys, or that we knew exactly which one was which and that kind of stuff, where the question seems to be the question from that Blue Beetle short from a couple of years ago, that because he's talking in the same way and speech pattern and stuff like that. But then they don't say, like, is Blue Beetle the Blue Beetle? Because he's not necessarily talking that way. And there's all this kind of stuff where I want more clarity on who's from where and why it matters. But then I also don't want them to use that as a constant story point of like, look at the cool thing. It's Hal Jordan from Green Lantern First Flight. Look how cool that is. I just want him to be there, or whatever. I want to have confirmation, because apparently, like you're talking about with Batgirl, apparently the Peacemaker from part 1 is supposed to be the DCEU Peacemaker also. And it's like, why though? Why did you? why would you choose?
Because he's there,
and now he's a cartoon. Shouldn't he be like kind of joking about how he's a cartoon now? I don't know.
Yeah. The wiki lists him of Earth 4, which would technically put him in the Charlton comics. I think.
Oh, question.
But honestly, I love how you brought up the question, because anytime he shows up in either of them, I'm like, we've not gotten enough questioning anything. Like, we're both children of the DCAU, and the question was so good in that show, particularly, obviously, with the Cadmus arc of the end of season... Oh, God. It's end of season 1. No, it's
technically 2. The DVDs have it as 1 for some reason, but yeah.
But and he's just like quite literally being like, why should we do anything you say? Because it's not like you help us. And it's like, great question.
Yeah, I really
Thank
liked
you.
his "I'm sticking my tongue out at you" kind of thing, where you can't see it.
Yeah, that's a character that needs to be in more things. Come on, James, you want to. If you're gonna do Peacemaker, you need to give us the question. And I'm upset that I'm not excited about Crisis, because it being something that...
Well, end of part 1, like you said, was setting up such a cool, like, oh, what's going to happen thing. Whereas part 2, I think anyone that's in their target demographic for these movies is going to know that the Anti-Monitor is the bad guy. But they maybe like halfway through the movie did a like... Oh, no, you're the opposite. You're the Anti-Monitor and that kind of thing. And I was like, okay, like I like this moment, but I thought that was going to be the big reveal at the end of the movie or whatever. And then it still was the big reveal at the end of the movie. But I actually, I was laughing about this as it happened. When he becomes Big Shadow Monster, he does a Kamehameha ball above his head. And then he says, now, and then the movie ends, and I went, what? What did he say? And I rewound and put my ear next to the TV speaker, and now, what? And I put the captions on, and it says, now, die. I'm like, that's what you're ending the movie on, is him saying, now die. And it's like, okay, cool. It's the Anti-Monitor, I guess. Like, I'm just not, part 3, I'm not like, oh, it can't come any sooner. It's now just like, it'll happen, and I hope it's good.
Well, but if I want the cameos, because quite frankly my investment would be significantly elevated. If the if this crisis was and like, I completely respect so many valid criticisms of the Arrowverse and its interpretation of the characters, but for the sake of it feeling like an event, they brought in pretty much anybody to contextualize the significance of the event. And honestly, it moves stories forward. I know a lot of people have issues with it, but bringing in Tom Welling and Erica Durance and progressing Smallville, which was a fundamental moment for me watching that show with my dad, and like that Clark giving up his powers to be Superman.
It's similar to like checking in with Tobey Maguire in No Way Home is like, oh, cool. Like now I know what you've been up to, instead of never knowing or, you know, just always being mad or whatever. But I feel like that's going to happen in part 3 where clearly, like obviously they recorded whatever Kevin Conroy says in part 3 before he died, duh. So, but there's no way that it was, everyone knew he was going to pass away. And so it's this big, cool thing that he says that's the most grandeur, like amazing thing that he could possibly say as the final thing he says. It's going to be a wave of slack going across the DCAU, and he's going to look up and say, oh my goodness. And then that's going to be the last thing Kevin Conroy says. And it doesn't matter. Like it's not going to be significant. People are going to be mad that it's not significant, but I'm not setting myself up for it to be. So.
Yeah. I think them having 2 Supermen in this, and one we've had 2.5 appearances, and then giving us a second Superman that is introduced in this. And then we get like the thing that I always find so funny, and I don't know, maybe it's just me, which is like you go to another universe and you see somebody you know, and it's like, James, and it's like, who are you? Like you don't, just because it looks like it's like seeing an actual doppelganger in real life where you're like, that looks just like so and so, but it's not the person you know. Like their atoms might be assembled the same way in this multiverse, but that's how I feel with a lot of this, which is like, we've talked about it a ton, but it's kind of the problem I have with this is they show us Terry, and it's like, that's definitely a Terry.
The
and that's all we're doing with it. Look at it like it's a Terry. And I don't know even if Kevin's, and I'm glad it's in Crisis Part 3. They would have had no idea making Suicide Squad kills the Justice League. They would have had no idea, and it's just the worst timing possible. But if he shows up, and so this is not going to happen, but it would kind of be amazing because the culmination of Crisis, if you're listening to this still and you don't know, it was to completely simplify the comic book universe. Its function in the Arrowverse was essentially Supergirl was on CBS. We've been saying she's Another Earth for simplicity's sake because CBS canceled the show, and we've been doing it for 2 other years. We're just going to bring her over and we're going to reset the world. And they brought in Black Lightning. They had Jay Garrick, John Wesley Schnipp, right? Like a lot of that things is, what if this culminating event is just, it ends and it's the beginning of Batman the Animated Series and the lightning strikes and it just continues and he says, I am vengeance, I am the night, I am Batman. It'd be like, and we're done. Like,
and you just start over. You just loop it all forever.
Yeah. Exactly. We're starting over again. Like, if it's something like Batman, like the ending of part 2 of with the Anti-Monitor, like of course it's probably going to be a letdown.
Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. What did he say?
I'm sorry. Kevin, can you record that again?
Die.
It's I am vengeance. Yeah. Yeah, it's like everybody being super happy that Peter Cullen kept being Transformers or Optimus Prime, and he's just the worst version of Optimus Prime in those films.
Yeah.
So I think we're on the same page. Part 3 is probably going to be a cameo fest. So I'm curious. We know Kevin's in it. What else really could they do? Because there's not really any. I think your assumption on the Decamu just being toast and our connection to that being Constantine's probably accurate. Like, do we get I guess you would the possibility of getting Batman. It's probably just a lot of Batman if we're being honest. It's Brave and the Bold Batman. Who's that? That's
Diedrich Bader. Yeah.
Diedrich Bader. There's not. That's the problem. There's only like maybe we get Kelly Cuoco's Harley. But that's just a Batman.
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, you could have some Young Justice thing, Teen Titans thing, but it's like if you do that at this point, because what they've set up with, like, oh, we've plucked these, 100 or so, whatever, very specific people from whatever Earths, and then now some of those Earths have been obliterated, including the one that Wonder Woman was on fighting with the Amazons. I guess she's just dead now. The only Wonder Woman that we have. And then, but like, I don't think that there's a non-shoehorned way to then be like, also these ones, Teen Titans and Young Justice and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like any of the cameos that we might get in that way will just be, someone going, oh, a thing in the sky, and then it moves on to the next one or whatever. And because they're not going to be part of, we're not going to have, I say we're not going to have B-Test Batman fighting with a bunch of guys, but the way that they had Terry say 2 sentences, we very well could, I have no idea. At least Terry got to say slag in this. That was kind of nice.
That is true. Yes. Well, if anything, it's probably just I guess Psycho Pirate's ability to traverse the multiverse
that's true.
Seems to be done, though. Like, when he's on the satellite, he no longer can
That was a
it.
weird thing to set up and then not really use at all. I don't know why. Like, I did really like that scene with Dr. Fate just kind of fucking around with him, but it also made no sense that he would be like, the Psycho Pirate, you won't get to me. Let me give you a bunch of superpowers. And then again, also the Monitor going, I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to give you even more superpowers. Like, there's just a bunch of weird that stuff. And then the only other main complaint I had was in the way of trying to, for whatever unnecessary reason, explain Supergirl's harbinger-ness. They have the satellite computer system go, I put her in here. I brought her in here. And he's like, why'd you do that? Like, well, I figured if you didn't want to look at her anymore, I'd just put her in the garage. And he was like, okay. And then that's the full setup for why she's there. Like, it's a very strange choice. I don't know.
Yeah, she's got a concussion. We should feed her.
Yeah.
Should we tell her anything? No.
And then does she? I guess she doesn't age because the ship doesn't age, or does everything inside the ship not age because she just
it's outside of time?
Yeah, but I didn't realize. I guess that applies to anyone in it or whatever, which is fine, whatever. But I was thinking this whole time, because in that Legion of Superheroes movie, Krypton explodes, she zooms away in her rocket, and then it just cuts to years later when she's on Earth, she's fighting, and then we just skip an entire, what we assume to be an entire, little girl lost style origin episode movie thing, and now she's just here. And that did feel kind of weird. But when in this movie, when she is stranded in space and they pull her in there, I was thinking, okay, so this is a different Krypton and a different universe.
Yeah.
And whereas we know what happened to that Supergirl, now we're going to see this Harbinger Supergirl is actually a different Supergirl. But no, it's the same one. He just kidnapped her for like 30 years, and then she went, I'm leaving, and then forgot about all of that. And so I thought it was a dream. Like, that part was the only thing that I felt like, I don't think you planned it to be this. I think you just wanted it to be that for some reason. But the rest of the time was fine, yeah.
On top of that, she goes to the future, and then at some point while she was in the future, after Clark's been abducted to War World, she came back to the present, like, where are you? And then he's like, come back.
Yeah, I mean,
what?
If they're like, if they really did lay out everything of where everybody is at what time, like, because I mean, the whole time I'm thinking we did timeline videos on the DeCamu. We've done DCAU timeline videos. I did a timeline video on the live action movies. I'm thinking this whole time, we did a Doom Patrol and Titans one, all this stuff, where I'm thinking like, okay, so it makes sense for Watchtower Database to do a timeline video on the Tomorrowverse stuff after these crisis parts are out, because theoretically that'll be the end, or maybe it won't, who knows. But I'm sitting there going like, man, there's a lot to keep track of here, actually, and some of it I don't know. Like, I didn't realize, or, watching it, I was thinking, okay, so Psycho Pirate, what was it? There was some part of the movie that I didn't think. Oh, it was Psycho Pirate sitting there with Dr. Fate. I figured.
When was that happening?
I figured that was like right now, like happening, present time, or maybe like a second before he gets pulled into, because he's in his costume. So I was like, he got that on the ship, on the monitor ship. Like, maybe he had it before, but it seemed like he was inventing it right then, and that's when he first got it. And then Dr. Fate gives him the Ankh powers, but then we see that he has those during the JSA movie, which was way before this. And then he gets
he's in he's never in the costume, because he's in like I'm a Nazi.
Yeah, he's in a weird robe.
And then he's I'm an Atlantis. Yeah. Like, he's essentially Aquaman's Jafar.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Right?
So, yeah. So when did he get that? I guess he had it already and just recreated it on the ship, but that's a very confusing point for me. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And, like, I didn't... I really wish, with the DeCamu leading into the big events, I'd say maybe... anytime that, similar to the MCU, anytime there was a new character or a returning character coming, I would rewatch. And obviously the Watchtower Database did I think it was around Hush. No, because which continuity did it Hush? DeCamu did Hush. Yeah. Leading up to, it was around there, because I think that was the movie that,
that's when we
like,
first
broke.
put out a timeline. Yeah, it was up through Hush. Yeah.
And so going back and kind of watching it in that order, and that payoff of all that continuity really made there was a recent thing, and I know you saw it because you liked it on Twitter. We're friends on Twitter, or X or whatever. It's a big deal, people. We're friends. And it was about DC, like, what's your favorite DC movies? And I love Justice League Apocalypse War, because even though that investment of like almost the same amount as phases 1 through 3 of the Avengers or the MCU, it really felt like the culminating event, particularly in having, like, similar to what you said, like, we had the Justice League Dark people, we had the Teen Titans people, we had the Justice League involved. Like, it was the ending of this almost, I think, 10 years of storytelling.
Yeah.
And we've
7
lost
or 8, but yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah, right. A long time, like a fair amount of projects over time, and not to mention the fact that we had Flashpoint initially was not, it was just like a movie where that ended with, like, right, we had the comic, but those were different things, and then we got the 52-ish, the Tuckerverse, technically, to some degree. People called it DeCamu that.
Yeah, I'm DeCamu, but yeah.
DeCamu's a better name, but
also has a cow sound in it, so that's always nice.
That is always fun. But my biggest sticking point, and I've said it multiple times, is the Flash being the heart of part 1 significantly affected my investment, because it's a character that's easy to fall in love with, and not to mention, like, his whole story is always about love, right? Iris is his lightning rod, if you're a fan of the live action show. And then part 2 is a lot of backstory that maybe doesn't even add up till the reveal of the bad guy.
Yeah, I feel like part 1, between all the Flash stuff and all of the revelations of connecting the puzzle pieces and that kind of stuff, I had several moments in part 1 of actually feeling feels. And then part 2 was just a bunch of stuff happened. And it wasn't bad stuff, but it was for the most part, but it was just stuff. And I do think, like you talked about up top, where it'll probably be a bunch of setup without us realizing it, where we'll be watching part 3 and be like, oh, that's why they showed children hanging from a church ceiling or whatever, a school ceiling, like, stuff like that. They're like, okay, it all makes sense now, hopefully. But right now it's just kind of like, why? Okay, so there were things. Yeah.
Yeah, I took over my boarding school, so the cops would be forever mortified by what they saw.
I made a kid show his dick to the class. Okay. Where's the anti-monitor? Why is this necessary?
That made as much sense to me as when we saw Bart Simpson's dick in the Simpsons movie.
Well, I feel like the Dr. Fate thing, that the whole like idea of that scene is cool because, again, I know who Dr. Fate is but I think is this the first time we're seeing Dr. Fate in these movies? I don't think he was in the JSA movie. So it's like, oh, shit, it's Dr. Fate. If it had been similar to something similar to Constantine, where he's so integral and like, okay, stupidly in this movie, they had a big musical sting when he's like, oh, John, I'm John Constantine, and ba-da-da-dun. I'm like, yeah, I obviously, or whatever. But with Dr. Fate, they could have done something similar. I don't know who I would pick, but some character from 20 movies ago were like, oh my God, no way, and it all makes sense now. And instead it was just, it's Dr. Fate, I guess. That's neat. Or whatever.
But they don't even have anybody through the universe of movies that would work, because the Society cast is Hawkman. Oh no, he is in it. But it's not that Dr. Fate.
Oh, Dr. Fate is
or
in.
Is it? Apparently, but I think that's a fundamental point.
Yeah.
Is we don't remember.
Yeah.
Because it's been.
And we're us, and we're going, who? So
yeah,
nobody.
Like, exactly.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking at the cover because it's Our Man who's on the cover. Reading, when does he show up?
I'm trying to think of when he's there. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he was just a member of the team, and I just completely forgot. I don't know.
I'm looking at the wiki really quickly. Okay, but meanwhile, the JSA finds the code breaker and recognizes as Dr. Fate.
Okay.
A man who called out to him. Okay, so but this is a problem of the storytelling of this quote unquote plan. If that was a John Constantine, who's kind of like, oh, I've been like, all versions of me have been made to be punished because of what I and Barry did on DeCamu universe. Right? And it's kind of like, this is going to sound incredibly stupid, but I know if I give the bad guy this ability, ultimately, like, it's the challenge these heroes need to overcome to fix things. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm going to give this bad guy a bat, but I'm going to give you a gun, and you'll win.
Are you talking about with Psycho Pirate and stuff? Is that...
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, something to establish, because the fact that you and I don't remember he was in JSA shows the impact of that character. Like, we know it's Wonder Woman because we saw her. We got the reminder in War World. Right? Because if Wonder Woman just showed up in Crisis, we'd be like, oh, it's just Wonder Woman.
Yeah. I think that they're kind of shot themselves in the foot a little bit with the DeCamu not being like accessible anymore, where they just have to use characters that are either brand new or you've seen twice now or whatever. But it's just, I don't know. I feel like I'm complaining a lot about it versus I do feel like my overall feelings are positive for the most part, where I want people to see these and enjoy them for what they are and not for what they wish they were or whatever. And that's kind of what I've felt about with any direct-to-video DC movie since they started them, is like Superman Doomsday is not it's the full Death of Superman and Return of Superman crammed into 90 minutes or less. And it's because of that, it's just a weird hodgepodge of ideas and character designs and explosions. But it's still like cool. That's neat that you did that. But just since the start, it's just been like, oh, you're adapting a thing. You either adapt it 100% or 20% and do whatever you want with the rest of it. And that's what these are. And I'm fine with that. Like I I enjoy that more. And I am still excited to see where it goes, but I wish I was more excited. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up Superman Doomsday, because Anne Heche as Lois Lane crying to Mon Pa Kent after Superman dies. Every single time I've rewatched that, it's made me get very emotional.
Well, but that's a good example too of like, we didn't know that Superman and Lois before that movie, and it can still be a good movie on its own. It's like, you don't have to have all of these build-ups and stuff. But when the plot is based around you caring about a specific version of a character that is too busy sharing screen time with a bunch of other characters you've never met before, then it's just kind of like, I don't know who I'm supposed to really be invested in. And so, like I said, this movie didn't give me any emotional beats of, oh man, wow, that part was really well done. It was just like the stepping stone to get to the next part, I would assume.
Yeah, it's the point that I kind of want to end on, which I think is the best positivity being, for the most part, what we want to put out there. And this connecting to, like, watching 1 and 2 together, I enjoyed that experience a lot, because knowing there's going to be some, whether it is or not, like people just walking by camera being like, remember me and remember me, right?
It's Jesse McCartney.
Yeah, I'm Jesse McCartney. What does he say? What is his line? I can, whelmed. Are you whelmed? And then he just walks off. Why is everybody always underwhelmed? Nobody's ever whelmed. Yeah. Watch Young Justice, everybody, please.
I was trying to think of some Jesse McCartney song, but I can't on the spot.
That's okay. I can't either. I'm looking forward to part 3 just to see what the conclusion is going to be, because ultimately Crisis does leave literal aftermath. Mm-hmm. So that to me is very intriguing.
I think there's been an official announcement. I can't remember about a Watchmen animated movie that's coming decently soon also. And I feel like if they're going to tie it in at all, that'll be something at the end of part 3 with, cause when, is it Superman and Batman get teleported out of Earth or whatever at the end of Legion of Superheroes, I think. And, it leaves behind a big, like, Dr. Manhattan symbol in the ground. And people have speculated, like, oh, he must be the true bad guy of Crisis or something. But I think it's just going to be an Easter egg that'll lead to something else, and that won't actually involve him. But I could be wrong. I don't know.
Well, it would be. I mean, it was not an event that I think a lot of people liked, but Doomsday Clock could easily be like a shared universe event. So, I mean, who knows? We will see. We don't have a date for part 3 yet, so I'm not going to ask you on the spot if you want to come and talk about it. This week's question of the week was, what Zack Snyder franchise under Netflix would you like to see a sequel to? So that's Rebel Moon or the Army of the Dead universe. And our only submission this week comes from Scotty Cameron, who said Army of the Dead. I think because I don't really know. I know I discussed some of this last week, but I'm not really sure which one I would like to see a sequel to. Until I've seen the extended versions of Rebel Moon, then maybe I'd be able to make a decision. But right now, I'd have to say probably Rebel Moon. Army of the Dead kind of feels complete to some degree, even though there's that cliffhanger at the end of the first one. But who knows? I guess we will see. This week's question of the week for this episode is, and I'm not going to put you on the spot because I've asked you before and you don't have an answer, and that's okay. Which is, because it's been a question on Jump on the Batwagon, which is, out of all of the direct-to-home video DC films, what is your favorite? So, James, you don't have to answer right now. But
I think I have an answer.
Okay, so what is your answer?
It's probably between Flashpoint Paradox, and Under the Red Hood, which are very basic answers, but all of them have their merits. If I have a chance to watch one of those two, I will take it. And I purposely put both of them on our watch list for Jump on the Batwagon. I'm being very selective with ones that I'm like very, very loosely connecting to stuff that Brian knows, because Under the Red Hood obviously is not DCAU, but it has such a DCAU vibe to it, and the animation is very similar, and it's also just kind of a character that I feel like Brian should know by the time he's done with the entire DC universe of stuff. And then Flashpoint starts off with a universe of an animated Justice League that we never see again, that was originally going to be the DCAU Justice League before they changed it, because I guess from what I understand, it was Warner Brothers didn't want to like officially kill that universe per the Flashpoint plot line. And so it's just kind of a random, never before seen, never seen again Justice League that's at the start of the movie. So both of those are like, okay, I got to show Brian these because they're really good, and yeah, that's my answer.
I can say that in the very near future, I will be joining you to discuss
Yes.
an episode of Jump on the Batwagon.
Yes.
Which I'm very much looking forward to. It'll be very fun to talk around Brian on your own show.
I think it's Brian talking around us is more likely.
That's true.
It's
very
for
curious.
him, though. We always have to remember it's for Brian.
Thank you so much for listening to the Film Realist podcast. James, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Next week's episode will be a review of The Fall Guy and a full season 3 review, the final season of The Bad Batch. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your film-loving friends. Leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform, and a friendly reminder that the podcast is available on YouTube now if you enjoy listening to your podcast there. My name is Kyle Naranya. I am the Film Realist. We'll see you next time.